Hello, everyone. Sientir here, and welcome to the Patron podcast, my Patron podcast, for, June 2021. And so this is a podcast brought to you by my patrons. They select the topic, and the topic that they selected this month was, if I could choose to live any distance from the equator, what distance would I choose? So they voted on this over at my Patreon at patreon.com/Sientir. And it's an interesting question to ask because there's what we have to do in order to try to answer this question is we have to actually think about what does it mean to be a distance from the equator. So there's a lot of different things that affect stuff like weather, such as altitude. So you can be a height from the equator, or height? Distance from the equator, either up or down, north or south, however you want to look at a map. And so in terms of like what I'd want, this is an interesting one because I do like a variety in seasons, and what ends up happening is, I understand it anyway, the closer you get to the equator, the more, I think the word I'm looking for is consistent things get in terms of outside. So you will end up having more consistency in terms of the length of days. So I want to call it the day-night cycle because I'm a game person. So I think the day-night cycle is the same all throughout the entire year, which is a weird way of saying it. But the lengths of days are going to be a lot more consistent. The further you get from the equator, obviously, the less consistent they get. In other words, as you go through the year, your winter section is going to have shorter days. And the further you get, the shorter the days will end up getting in the winter, and the summer section will have longer and longer days. And the further north you get, or south, the further away from the equator you get, the longer those are going to be. So this brings up some interesting questions that I'd actually need to know more about in terms of how altitude affects things. Because I've been to like Hawaii, for example, on a family vacation years and years ago, where I know that things like, I've heard the difference in temperature between summer and winter is less than the difference in temperature between day and night in Hawaii. So you're just going to get a lot more consistency in terms of that sort of stuff. So I imagine it's like the effect of seasons. So the interesting thing about this question is, in order to be able to kind of evaluate where I'd want to be, I'd need to know like how altitude factors into, like, if you are at a high altitude, because higher altitude tends to be cooler, right? So if you're at a higher altitude on the equator, do you just basically have one mono season, but is it like at a cooler temperature? Like, I don't know actually how that works. I think what I personally like best is I don't mind, like, I like having different seasons. So I'd actually want to be enough distance from the equator that I have different seasons, that I have autumn and the changing of the trees. I have winter. We will get back to that one in a moment. I have spring and the appearance of flowers and blooming and all of that. And then, I mean, I'm not as big of a fan of summer. I don't like hot weather, but, so from that standpoint, I'd probably actually want to be further away from the equator, because theoretically that would sort of reduce the heat in summer, like, but it also kind of makes winter longer-ish in terms of weather, because a lot of it, for the most part, like, I'm a homebody, I enjoy being inside, so this is like, what do I want in the environment outside? As I look over to my window over there is why I'm looking over that way. I have a window, so I'm thinking about the weather. Like, I think the big thing for me is when it's getting cold outside and when the days are getting shorter, when you get winter, I want snow. It's one of those things. I live in the greater Seattle area where we don't really get snow here in the winter. We might get snow, like a little bit of snow, like 6 inches, maybe 8, but that's pushing it. Like six or fewer inches for a few days, maybe a weekend. Like this past winter, I think we had like a weekend, like a Friday to Monday sort of thing, where we had like, I don't know, maybe 6 inches of snow. And then it was there, hung around a little bit for that weekend, and then was basically gone at the start of the week, which is great for, you know, people trying to do stuff and not having to travel through the snow. But it's also like, so for me, snow is really important for the feel. When it's dark, when it gets dark early, like around here, in getting close to Christmas time, it's getting dark about 4 p.m., 4 in the afternoon, or what is that, 1600 for you all in 24-hour time. But it's one of those things where if it's just overcast and starting to feel kind of dark, like it's dark throughout the entire day and it's just dark, I don't like that at all. But if there's snow, suddenly that just makes everything better. Snow makes outside more brighter because it's a highly reflective surface, but it also affects sound a lot. So it's the sort of thing where if you've never really experienced snow, like aside from just the visual, when you walk outside, it has a profound impact on the sense of the atmosphere, because snow is a highly absorptive substance from an audio standpoint, right? It really absorbs sound really well. So it kind of like makes everything kind of muted, and it creates this effect where everything starts feeling more intimate, cozier. It creates a strong sense of like a more intimate coziness to the outside, and that's something that I really like. And it's something that we don't really have out here. And so, like, as long as it's precipitating, if it's raining, that's fine. But it doesn't actually rain, like, as much as people think for this area. It just doesn't. So, like, if it's raining, that also kind of does the mood thing that makes things okay. But if it's just dark, I don't like that. So from that standpoint, I'd want to be closer to the equator, in terms of, like, not wanting it to be getting dark at 4 p.m. But the thing is, if you're getting closer to the equator, instead of getting dark at 4 p.m., it's getting dark at like 6 or 7 or however you're calibrating your clock, and because it's going to be closer to 12-hour days either way, right? So I actually think I'd want to be like, I'm not quite sure how far, because again, like there's more to weather than just the distance from the equator. But I think I'd actually want to be like enough of a distance from the equator that I have some actual like seasons going on, so that I have particularly autumn. I have winter, but I want a winter with snow and ice and on the trees, because if you've never seen like a nice thick layer of ice on a tree branch with the sun shining through, it's beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful. I love that beauty. I love looking outside. Which, I mean, you can't see it's over there. It's off camera, but looking outside and just seeing snow, it's beautiful. I love it. So I think I have a range I think I'd be okay with. I'm not sure I'd want to be quite as far north as somewhere like Alaska or the northern reaches of Canada, where you're going to be... I like snow, but I also like having some variety, and I like having spring and autumn leaves and all of that. I like having some amount of summer, theoretically. Again, I don't like it beyond like 75 degrees Fahrenheit, which is something in Celsius. I want to say about 20. That sounds about right. 21, 22, probably. I don't like it much above that, but yeah. So I think I'd... In conclusion, how far would I like to be from the equator? I'm not sure exactly. There's a range, but I want to be far enough that I have seasons, that I can have snowy winters, that I can have flowers in the spring and leaves in the autumn. That's the stuff that I want. So thank you all for listening. And until next month, you can find me at my Patreon at patreon.com/Sientir, where you can support me. And for all those who do, thank you very much. Take care, everyone, and goodbye.